I'd like to begin my remarks with a story. Among the millions who suffered through the hells of the Holocaust, including the squalor of the ghetto, the torture of the death marches, and the horrors of 4 concentration camps, was a man by the name of Haim Shapiro. Before the war, Haim had a beautiful family, a wife and 8 children. Within the span of a little over a year, he had lost his wife and 7 of his children, without even the chance to properly mourn for them. After the war, Haim and his only surviving son, Baruch, were liberated from Buchenwald. They wallowed in the DP camps for nearly 3 years, until finally in 1948, they gained passage on an immigrant ship and arrived in Palestine. Shortly thereafter, young Baruch Shapiro volunteered to fight in Israel's War of Independence, a desperate battle for survival against overwhelming odds. Without any previous training, he was taken to a ravine, handed a rifle, taught how to shoot a few bullets, and was sent off to war. Baruch joined Yitzhak Rabin's Harold Brigade and distinguished himself in battle. While fighting to break the siege of Jerusalem, Baruch received the field commission as an officer and was awarded a medal for bravery under fire. One day, Haim Shapiro was sitting in his tiny living room in Tel Aviv when he glanced out the window and saw what no soldier's parent ever wants to see: a delegation heading up the path to his apartment. The members of that delegation would later say that Haim Shapiro opened the door before they had a chance to knock, that he never read the telegram. He just crumpled it in his hands, for he knew. He knew that his last remaining son was also gone. With regard to the funeral arrangements, Haim Shapiro made one and only one request: that his son be buried in Jerusalem. The next day, hundreds of mourners gathered at Mount Herzl, the National Military Cemetery in Jerusalem. Most of them had never known the decorated soldier Baruch Shapiro, nor his father Chaim, but they had heard of this terrible tragedy, and they wanted to pay their respects. Yigal Yadin, the IDF chief of staff, stood by Haim Shapiro's side. What Hitler had not finished in the crematoria had ended with an Arab Legion bullet, the last of the Shapiro sons to leave this world. As the coffin was being lowered into the ground, a strange thing happened. Haim Shapiro began to sing. People thought that he had completely lost his mind, and understandably so. Yigal Yadin put his arm around Chaim's shoulders, trying to comfort him and settle him down. Someone else ran to get him some water, but he shrugged them all off and continued to sing his song. The crowd had no idea what to make of it until finally Haim Shapiro looked at them and said, "I have been through hell, the likes of which most people cannot imagine. I lost more than 70 relatives in 1 year, including 7 children, my wife, and my parents. I have no place to mourn them, no graves. They are but ashes over the skies of Europe. And I have no idea why they died. But this son, at least this son, I know why he died. He died so we could have a home for the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And he has a grave here in Jerusalem. And for this I sing. For this I sing." When Haim Shapiro finished speaking, he began to sing once more, this time grabbing people's hands to dance. 500 mourners joined him, singing and dancing against the setting sun of the Jerusalem sky. Yes, he said, we are in pain, but we are home. After thousands of years, we are home. 18 years later, May of 1967, Haim Shapiro's spiritual victory would come under threat again, as 5 mighty, well-equipped Soviet-trained armies began mobilizing and gearing up to invade Israel from all sides, while other oil-rich Arab nations pledged endless supplies of funds and resources to the efforts. Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israel, a de facto declaration of war. Its president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, filled the airwaves daily with promises of the complete destruction of Israel, the next genocide of the Jewish people, God forbid. We will push Israel into the sea, he promised. We will soon be having lunch in Tel Aviv, added his military commander. The mood on the streets of Israel was bleak. A sense of gloom and doom hung over the population. City parks and soccer fields were being consecrated as graveyards. Blood drive stations were everywhere. Hotel lobbies were being converted into casualty centers. And talk of another Holocaust was on many lips. It was during those very dark days that the Lubavitcher Rebbe stepped before the microphones with a message for world Jewry. He emphatically insisted that the sense of foreboding was unfounded, calling upon Jews world over to rededicate themselves anew to their faith, and more specifically for every Jewish man, regardless of their level of observance, to put on the tefillin. The Rebbe promised that the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, that not only was there not going to be a Holocaust, but that Israel was on the verge of realizing a victory of historic proportions. The Rebbe's assurances proved prophetic indeed, as the IDF took the fight to its enemies, scoring incredible, mind-boggling victories in battle after battle, from the total destruction of the entire Egyptian Air Force in the early hours of the war, to the capture of the Sinai Peninsula, to the valiant defense of Jerusalem, to the gaining control of the West Bank, and to seizing the Golan Heights. In 6 days' time, Israel had tripled its size of its territory, creating essential buffers for its security and projecting a new aura of invincibility going forward. Most significant of all, however, was that which took place on the 3rd day of the war. Launched initially in response to Jordan's unprovoked attack upon the city's established Jewish sectors, the defense of Jerusalem was a series of fierce, bloody battles. The question looming in the back of many minds was, would they? Would they dare? Would Israel entertain the notion of taking back the old city from which Jews had been expelled 18 years earlier and had been banned ever since? And then it came. After all behind-the-scenes political wrangling and debating, Moti Gur, the commander of Israel's 5th Paratroop Brigade, received the long-awaited green light. The IDF's crack unit could not rush through the Lion's Gate quickly enough, dispensing with whatever pockets of resistance still dared to try and stop them. Colonel Gur radioed his troops. We are approaching the Temple Mount and the Western Wall. Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, have been praying for thousands of years for this historic moment. Go forward to victory. Forward to victory. And then Moti Gur's most famous radio transmission of all, shouting in exultation the iconic words that have been etched in our consciousness for 50 years. Har Habayit Biyadenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. The Temple Mount is in our hands. What words can do justice to the feelings of the Chayalim, the brave soldiers of the IDF, who are on hand when Rabbi Shlomo Goren, the chief chaplain of the IDF, sounded the shofar at the Western Wall? Or the euphoria of our brothers and sisters as they threw their arms around the stones of the Kotel of the Western Wall, embracing and kissing them like a long-lost child falling into the arms of a loving mother after years of estrangement and separation. Jews of all stripes, from the most avowedly secular to the most intensely religious, were overcome by a profound sense of awe as they tried to absorb the magnitude of what they had just experienced. Their souls were laid bare as they came together as one with God, one with each other. Perhaps the best summation of it all came from a rather unlikely source. The day after the recapture of the Old City, Israel's heroic defense minister, Moshe Dayan, a self-described secularist, he came to the Kotel, he came to the Western Wall, and he slipped a note into a crevice between the stones upon which he had written a single line from the book of Psalms. Me'et Hashem hoysazot hi niflaot be'einenu. It is from God that this came to pass. It is a wondrous and miraculous thing before our eyes. You see, at that moment, nobody but nobody, and certainly not anyone with first-hand knowledge of the scale and scope of the victory as Moshe Dayan, could doubt that what had occurred was a series of open and revealed miracles. My friends, as we are gathered here this evening, it is exactly 50 years to this day from the culmination of the Six-Day War. And so, with our hearts filled with abounding love and gratitude for Israel, and with immense pride for all that it has done, not only for the Jewish people, but for all of humanity, we are devoting this segment of tonight's celebration to a communal tribute to that momentous event. And I'd like to publicly thank some dear friends who undertook this dedication of this special segment and helped make it possible. My dear friends, David and Orna Del Rahim. Thank you so much, David and Orna. Friends, I know of at least one veteran of the Six-Day War who is with us here tonight, and there may very well be more. At this time, I would like to ask this unassuming hero of the Israeli Air Force, who flew missions on all fronts in 1967, along with any other veterans of that conflict who may be in the room, to please rise so that we may show them our due gratitude and respect. Ladies and gentlemen, Sergeant Major Cantor Michael La Paz, please rise. Now I'd like to ask all veterans of the Israeli Defense Forces who served in any military capacity of any kind at any time in defense of Artseinu Hakdosha to please rise and be recognized. Let's give them all a round of applause. Thank you. Last but not least, it is common knowledge that while the relationship between Israel and the United States has always been a very close and benevolent one, it was after the events of the Six-Day War that this relationship between the two beacons of democracy became an even tighter and more symbiotic one, especially with regard to the sharing of technology and intelligence and military cooperation. At this time, I'd like to ask all members and veterans of the United States Armed Forces in this room to please rise and be recognized. Thank you. Thank you for your patriotism. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. My friends, the spirit of faith and solidarity that enveloped Am Yisrael in the days and weeks immediately following the Six-Day War, the manner in which the unshakable and unbreakable Jewish soul was exposed and revitalized, continues to reverberate to this day. For one thing, the outreach endeavors of Chabad, which had been growing steadily under the Rebbe's leadership, hit new strides in the wake of 1967, sparking a new global Jewish renaissance that has been growing exponentially ever since. The programs and activities of Chabad of the Conejo as implemented from our 9 regional centers are certainly a manifestation of that renaissance. The sparks of inspiration that are ignited, the flames of Yiddishkeit that are kindled, the illuminations of wisdom, goodness, and kindness that are projected forward are powerful beacons that enable people from all walks of life to find their way in what can often be dark and confusing times. As Haim Shapiro of blessed memory essentially said while standing over the grave of his last son, after all those years of not understanding why we were dying, it is at long last time for us to celebrate that we are living. Am Yisrael Chai, always and forever. That is the triumph of Israel. That is the message of the Six-Day War. That is what Chabad of the Conejo stands for. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what this evening is all about. The video you're about to see tells the story. "22 years after the liberation of the Nazi concentration camps, just 19 years after Israel attained its independence as a Jewish state, its enemies were agitating and mobilizing for the ultimate of confrontations, one they promised would result in the utter destruction of Israel and the total annihilation of all Jews living upon its soil.
أبناء الشعب العربي هم السبب فيما حدث في حرب فلسطين. أنا أعرف أن الشعب العربي من كل بلد عربي
Egypt moves 100,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and 900 heavy guns into the Sinai Desert. The Egyptian military signs a pact with Syria to the north and Jordan to the east, tightening a noose around Israel's neck. Holocaust scenarios are being discussed openly in the media. After 19 years of an uneasy ceasefire, Israel's enemies are finally going to take up where they left off in 1949. Headlines predict a bloody end. Israeli Defense Department estimates expect at least 10,000 dead in the impending war. Chief Rabbi Gorn sent men to inspect public parks to decide which would be converted to cemeteries after the war. May 23rd. Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran to Israeli shipping, cutting off Israeli ports in Eilat from the rest of the world. The move is officially an act of war. Finally, on May 28th, Prime Minister Eshkol addresses the nation, attempting to calm the raw nerves. The address only increases the panic. On that same day, in Brooklyn, New York, 20,000 school children gathered at a parade for the Lag BaOmer holiday.
Alle Brüder und Schwestern, was gefühlen sich in Eretz HaKodesh und Eretz Israel, stehen nicht in einem im Lager, wo der Rebbe steht bei Schicksal und Schicksal seine Brüche und Atzloche und Yeshua in a vergrößerter Los Gedei sie soll mal rauskommen und sie will mal rauskommen. Von dem itzigen Masse mit Hatzlacher.
On June 3rd, the Rebbe called on Jewish men everywhere, particularly soldiers of the IDF, to put on tefillin, if only once, to fulfill the Torah commandment for Jewish males to don phylacteries. He quoted the words of the Midrash.
V'ro kolam orz kishem Hashem nikro lecha. Am zeta das geht idische Zova. Wo sehr Anführer ist ad Hashem Elokei Atzvois. Is hat dämmelt wie Jorum mi meko, da schreckt man sich per se.
At 7:45 a.m. on June 5, 1967, 183 planes took off from Israeli airfields to attack air bases across Egypt. Within 8 hours, almost the entire Egyptian Air Force would be destroyed. In the battle on the ground, the IDF destroyed more than 800 Egyptian tanks, and thousands of soldiers were taken prisoner. 80% of Egypt's military equipment was lost in the Sinai Desert in under 48 hours. At 9:45 a.m., Jordanian forces in southeast Jerusalem opened artillery fire along the border, and Jordanian troops entered the UN's Jerusalem complex. Israel mounted a strong response. By the morning of June 6th, the IDF Central Command occupied areas around Jenin, the Dotan Valley, and the eastern slopes of Mount Gilboa. In 25 hours of bloody battle, East Jerusalem and Shechem were taken. The site of the Holy Temple, including its western wall, was liberated. On the afternoon of June 7th, Israeli forces began to descend into the Jordan Valley. 24 hours later, the battle ended with the conquest of the Hebron Hills. The strategic Golan Heights, from where Syria had been shelling directly down onto Israeli farms and towns. On the morning of June 9th, in a literal uphill battle, 2 brigades of the IDF Northern Command managed to break through Syrian defenses on the heights. After 7 hours of heavy fighting, they established strongholds in the northern and central sectors. On the morning of June 10th, Syrian defenses collapsed and most of the Syrian forces withdrew eastward. At 6 p.m. on June 10th, 6 days after the fighting began, a ceasefire came into effect. Israel experienced a victory unmatched in its history. It conquered an area 3 times its previous size. The world stood in awe. The entire world recognized that a miracle had taken place.
Across the deserts of Sinai, a biblical prophecy comes to pass as the forces of Israel sweep on in an astonishing triumph of strategy.
And that victory is a swift, smashing, and total one, as crack Air Force, infantry, artillery, and tank corps combine to sweep across the Sinai Peninsula to the Suez Canal, east into Jordan.
In 6 days, the war was over. How did Israel do it?
It's the first time in 19 years that Jews have been allowed to visit and pray at the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon.
And Israel shall be a proverb among all people.
אל דבש שדותיה, אל הכרמל והמדבר, אל עם אשר לא יחשב, שאת בניו לא יפקיר לשר, אל ארץ צבי שבהריה פועמת עיר מדור לדור, אל ארץ אם לטבורה קשורים בנר